Hello, everyone. In today's session, we want to explore what is obviously one of the most important aspects within sports, team dynamics and cohesion. And that's because so much of sport is played within teams. One of the most famous sportsmen worldwide, Michael Jordan, had great individual success for a number of years. But until he was able to find himself fit within a team, he was never able to reach the pinnacle of his sport, which was to win an NBA championship. And as you can see on this opening slide, there's this statement that's attributed to him. Talent wins games, but teamwork and intelligence wins championships. So let's begin by defining a group or a team. So social psychologists define a group as two or more people who interact with and exert mutual influence on one another. Now, that interaction and interdependence for a common purpose is what distinguishes a group from a collection of individuals. So you can have a group of people standing around. If they're not interacting for a common purpose, then that's really a collection of people. The minute they start to interact and depend upon each other to achieve a purpose, we've now moved from a collection of individuals to a group, or in some senses, a team. Now, within the context of sport, we can say that a team is a special type of group that has four characteristics. First, and importantly, there's a collective sense of identity. That team has a name, that team often has a uniform, and those things unite the team together into a sense of we-ness and versus I-ness. So you think about any team, whether it's a national team or an individual club team. First and foremost, you think about the team Barcelona, and then you think about the members of the team. And there's a collective identity that the team has, the Barcelona Football Club, the Los Angeles Lakers. They have a collective we-ness identity. The second thing that identifies a team is that there are distinctive roles and responsibilities of the individual members in the team. So not all members do the same thing. Each has individual roles, each has individual functions. In order to make this work, of course, then there are structured modes and lines of communication that ensure the success of the team. And finally, there are certain norms, that team is governed by certain norms, some of which are clearly defined and some of which are almost unwritten rules. And these norms guide and build team culture and help shape the attitudes, the motivations, and the behavior of your players. Let's talk a little bit about those group norms because they're very important. Group norms are the informal rules that groups adopt that regulate and regularize members' behavior. A good example is seen in the picture before you. At the end of every tennis match, the players shake hands. This represents a mark of respect and a mark of good sportsmanship. However, that's not a prerequisite. That's not something that's required. If you don't shake hands, you won't lose a match or lose a point. But you will have violated a group norm, and it won't be looked upon favorably within the tennis fraternity. Within the concept of a team, group norms then are essential for creating culture. And that culture will, in turn, will define things like level of effort, patterns of behavior, patterns of belief and self-confidence. Key to establishing these group norms is the role of the leaders within the group, because very often they tend to set the group norms and set the standards by which others are expected to behave. Interestingly, you find females tend to understand intuitively these group norms a lot better than males. Now, the idea of group norms and conforming to norms has been studied in psychology for many, many years. One of the earliest experiments was conducted in the 1950s. It's a classic experiment in which 7 students were asked to judge the length of a line compared to 3 other lines, as you can see in the diagram. This is a line that they are supposed to judge, and these are the comparison lines. Now, 6 of the participants were part of the experiment, and they were told to give incorrect responses. And only one of the participants did not know what was going on, and they had to give the true response or their honest opinion. All the other 6, they were told which one to choose. And then the naive participant had to choose. And 1/3 of the time, even though it's clearly obvious which is the correct match, 1/3 of the time, the naive participant went along with the group norm. They were influenced by the norm that was established by those who went before them. And that shows you the power of the social construct and the power of the context in which individuals are placed. So these group norms help to build team culture. And things that help to define team culture will be proximity. How do you create a good social environment that brings the members into close contact with one another and produces a lot of team interaction, not just within the context of the competitive environment, but also outside of the competitive environment? Is there a distinct sense of the group that separates it from the rest of the world so that the group feels distinctive, the group feels coherent, and the group feels like it has its own unique identity? Coaches often use this to motivate the team by creating a we against the world type of mentality to get the team members to buy into that collective sense of identity and distinctiveness. Norms of fairness will bring a group closer together. If people feel within the group they're being treated fairly, then they will buy into the team culture. And in the same way, if they're not being treated fairly, they will not. When members of the team find similarities with one another, it creates the team culture. And when there's a sense of task interdependence, let me use an example here. In the sport of baseball, the pitcher has a lot less dependence on the batter. If you compare that with soccer, in soccer, there's a much greater sense of interdependence than you might find in a sport like baseball. And so in soccer, it's easier to build that team culture. And finally, a very important aspect of building team culture is a sense that members of the team have social support. What is social support? Well, social support is an exchange of resources where the provider helps the recipient and takes care of the recipient's well-being. If you want to build good team culture, the members of the team have to feel that they have social support, that there's support during times of uncertainty and stress, that if there are breakdowns in mental or physical aspects of their performance, they'll be supported, and they'll be provided with good communication. All of these things show the athlete that they have a safe space in which to perform, help shape culture, and eventually help improve performance. Well, one other aspect of teams, as we just saw, was teams have definitive structures in which people understand their roles and responsibilities. Now, there are some formal roles that are very clearly defined within a team. So there's a team coach and a team manager. There might be a team captain. And also, depending on the type of sport, there'll be certain positions which a team might play. In American football, you have a wide receiver, you have a running back, you have a quarterback. And so these are formally defined roles. Then there are informal roles. Informal roles are not formally defined, but they're things that evolve over time and serve an important aspect within the functioning of the team. Now, it's important for group structure, for team structures, that there's 1, role clarity, and 2, role acceptance. If you don't have these 2 things, clarity and acceptance, what you end up with is role conflict. For some reason, the person who has to occupy that role doesn't feel comfortable, whether they don't feel they have the ability, whether they don't understand their role, whether they don't like their role and not motivated. Whatever the reason, they don't fit within the role, and therefore they're rubbing against the grain. Clarity means you understand the role. Acceptance means you're willing to perform the role. And both are necessary for team success. We just spoke about examples of informal roles. We said the leader is often formalized, but very often you have non-formalized leaders. They might not be the team captain, but they might be the one who works the hardest and therefore sets the tone for effort and dedication on the team. Then you might have somebody who's always talking and encouraging. Often in cricket, that's the role of the wicket keeper. And then you have somebody who sacrifices and is not so much concerned about his own personal stats, but is doing the little things to ensure the team is going well. That's called team player. Then you have roles like some members of the team, they might be the socialite, the one who's organizing after training get-togethers and hangouts and always is the life of the team and increasing group harmony. You might have a comedian or you might have an enforcer. There are many different roles that people can adopt depending upon the particular sport that is played. In all of this, the key thing, as we mentioned before, is role clarity and role acceptance, and not having conflicting or overlapping roles that destabilize the functioning of the team. How do teams form? Well, this has been studied not just in sports. This has been studied in business and in many other types of organizations. And there are three models that suggest how teams come about. There's a linear model, a pendular model, and a life cycle model. And all of these models kind of exist on a continuum. There's no one right or wrong model. The most common example of the linear model is the forming, storming, norming, performing description. It consists of 4 stages, as you can see, that teams pass through. The forming stage is when the players are getting familiar with one another. Relationships are developing, and they're now coming into an understanding of what's taking place. The storming is as people fight and adjust to role clarity and role acceptance. Sometimes there could be pushback, people adjusting and trying to understand their role, and there could be resistance. Over time, that gets managed and adjusts, and the team develops and now moves into a state of solidarity and cooperation as conflicts are resolved and people accept their roles. And then from this place on, the effectiveness of the team can elevate, and the team now moves on to the performing stage. Here's another graph that you can just pause and look at that describes forming, storming, norming, and performing in another way. But other models of teams suggest that this linear model isn't always accurate. That as the team is forming, there are shifts that are taking place all the time. That once you have differentiation and conflict, or the storming and norming phase, as you perform, once you reach your performing, then something could happen. The team might change, or an injury might occur, and you have to go through that differentiation and conflict, that storming phase again. And you keep going through these pendular cycles of performing well, and then a change and resolution and conflict, and performing well, and then a change and resolution and conflict, until the life cycle of that team comes to an end. And of course, that leads us to the last model, which is a cyclic perspective, which says that teams don't go on in perpetuity. The club might go on in perpetuity, but the team itself goes through different phases and often will reach a peak. And then that version of the team dies. Players leave, players are traded, or the team might only be put together for a season for like recreation teams, and everything changes. And so the team goes through a growth cycle of being born or being formed, coming together, coming to cohesion, reaching maturity, and then different things happen and the team breaks up. Well, let's talk a little bit about the concept of group cohesion. Now, cohesion is derived from a French word that talks about the forces that unite something together. One of the leading researchers on cohesion defines it as a dynamic process that reflects the tendency of a group to stick together and remain united in the pursuit of its objectives. So there are two things you see there: the tendency of the group to stick together and function as a team, and not just function as a team in pursuit of those objectives. And so we can say group cohesion is a tendency for a group to be in unity while working towards a goal or satisfying the emotional needs of its members. Within that context, there are considered to be two types of cohesion: social cohesion and task cohesion. Social cohesion talks about the interpersonal relationship between the group members, the extent to which the group allows the team members to come into a sense of self-fulfillment and to achieve their desired goals. Task cohesion refers to the objectives of the team. How can the team work together to achieve those objectives, which are often related to the performance in the sport? Now, Karan in 1982 put together a model of group cohesion. And he said that there are 4 factors that affect this cohesion. Those factors are environmental factors, personal factors, team factors, and leadership factors. And you can read these in your textbooks to get a better understanding of each. These factors work together to affect task cohesion and social cohesion. And then that level of cohesion is going to affect how the group performs, and that's also going to affect how individuals perform within the team. And so this model of cohesion is quite complex, but it ties very much into what we were talking about before. What are the cultural factors around the team that bind the team together and cause it to work? Now, in building team cohesion, there are certain things that coaches and leaders must do. And this is very similar to what we were talking about just a little while ago with culture. One of the first things that's important in establishing team cohesion is that all members of the team should be treated equally. Favoritism will decrease cohesion, whereas fairness will give a sense of team identity and uniqueness, and that will increase cohesion. In order to achieve this, it's important for the leaders and the coaches within the team to understand the players as individuals. And so both see the players as members of a team, but also understand the individual dimensions and requirements of those players. Building team cohesion also requires team unity, which must be built via team building activities, via motivational speeches, by social events, and by physical things like uniforms and creating a shared identity. It's important inside of this that even though there may be subgroups within the team, these subgroups don't become exclusive to the detriment of the overall functioning within the team if cliques are formed. Building team cohesion requires open communication, team meetings, constructive sharing of criticism that allows people to air grievances and air suggestions and gives members of the team a sense that they have a voice and they're contributing to the overall decision making within the team. And finally, team cohesion is established when you create a task-focused complex, a task-focused climate. You create an environment in which there are goals and objectives. Everybody on the team understands the team goals and objectives. People understand how their individual goals and objectives meet the team goals and objectives, and everyone is pulling in the same direction. Here, there should be a focus not just on outcome goals, but also process and performance goals, and a focus on skill development and effort, all help with motivation. But you can't just require the coaches to help form team cohesion. The members also are important for team cohesion. And peer relationships are a key aspect of team cohesion and an essential part of the athletic process. Many athletes talk about this after they retire, that one of the things that they enjoyed the most and they missed the most is the fact that they had camaraderie and those peer relationships. And so team members must be responsible for getting to know the other team members. Ensure no one is excluded. And there's a special responsibility on the older leaders within the team to ensure that persons aren't excluded and there are no divisions. Team members must apply positive reinforcement with their peers. They can offer suggestions for improvement, but they must always be constructive, seeking to build up the person rather to be critical and attack them. Obviously, in the context of team, conflicts will arise, and it's important that these things are not hidden under the carpet, but that they're addressed quickly and resolved. And finally, one thing that's important that is often talked about is this concept of hazing. This idea that when new members on the team join, they must go through certain rituals. That has not been shown to increase social cohesion, and it has been shown to reduce task cohesion, and is generally considered dangerous and should be avoided. Now, one of the purposes of the team is to maximize output. And one of the things that's interesting is that it has been shown that the individual abilities of a team might not necessarily be a good predictor of how the team will perform. What do I mean by that? Just because you get together a collection of very skilled individuals and you put them in a group doesn't mean that that team will perform well. And a guy came up with a model in the 70s, Steiner, in which he said actual productivity is equal to potential productivity minus losses due to faulty group processes. And he said, so those individuals, they have a maximum potential, but often the productivity that emerges is because there are faulty group processes. And those faulty group processes often result from either motivational issues or coordination issues. The implication of Steiner's model is this idea of super teams might not necessarily work. And that's been seen in the NBA, where often you can pull together teams with great talent, but for some reason they don't reach their maximum potential. Here then, you see the value of leadership and coaches, because coaches are the ones that have to reduce the faulty team processes through training and structure and ensure that there's the development of cohesion and the putting of the individuals in the best role for success. And the coach is the one that has to get the team members to buy into those things. If that doesn't occur, then the team is not going to be successful. Now, very interestingly, research has been done on this. And there's something called the Ringelmann effect. And the Ringelmann effect is this, is the tendency of individual members of a group to become increasingly less productive as the size of the group increases. And here's an example that's been used in tug of war. If you have the number of workers and it increases from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 8, there's an expected performance. So let's call that 8 units. But as the number of members increase, the actual level of performance levels off and it actually doesn't reach 8. And the more you add, the more there's the more members you add, the more there's a difference between the expected performance and the actual performance. And that's the Ringelmann effect. This difference here is due to the faulty processes that we just looked at in Steiner's model. These faulty group processes are not allowing the team to reach its maximum outcome. Remember, we said there are 2 types of faulty process: coordination losses and motivational losses. Coordination losses refers to the fact that the team isn't combining their individual efforts well. The strategy is wrong. The communication is wrong. People don't understand their roles. They're not connecting well with another, and they're not functioning as a well-coordinated team. Motivational losses is often called social loafing. And this is where, because you're a member of a team, you're not working at your maximum effort for some reasons, which we'll discuss in a little while. And so when you look at it as a graph, this has actually been studied. And what you find is that the loss of effect is both due to motivational and coordination losses. But quite often, the one that's bigger is what's called social loafing, or the motivational losses. So what are some of the things that contribute to social loafing, people losing motivation? Well, if a member of the team feels like my contribution here isn't useful, so I'm redundant, he's not going to contribute. If they feel that their task is meaningless, if they are not able to evaluate the value of their task, if they don't have a sense of involvement, if they aren't able to compare themselves with others, if they see themselves as least in ability to the others, and if the team is very large and therefore they get lost, all of these things can create social loafing, a sense of not being motivated enough to contribute, as you can see here with a couple of members who are not lifting load inside of this team. Therefore, if you want to eliminate social loafing, you have to focus on the importance of every individual and unique contribution. You have to find a way to praise individual contributions and identify when social loafing might occur and discuss it and identify it. You have to appreciate the value of each person in the team. One of the ways of doing this might be dividing the team into smaller units and giving them different tasks and giving them a sense of responsibility. And another way is, if things aren't going well, don't focus so much on the individuals. Find some other way to blame what's taking place. Now, here's another interesting aspect of team performance called the Kola Effect. Now, the Kola Effect is almost like the opposite of social loafing. It's an increasing motivation that sometimes occurs among individuals working in groups. But usually, it's a group in which coordination isn't so much required. So a good example of this is like team relays. Now, team relays, there is some coordination when you hand over the baton, but the performance of the individual isn't so much dependent upon the performance of the others. And the Kola effect tends to occur because the less capable members of the team, they become especially motivated by being around the higher performing members of the team, and they increase their level. And this has been proven by research. One study in 2009 looked at swimmers' performance in individual swims and in relays. And it was found that the individual members of the team, who were the slower team members, actually swam faster in their relay than their individual races. Something about being part of that team motivated and galvanized the weaker swimmers, and they swam even faster than what they would have done if they were swimming alone. And so here, this is where you have the flip side of social loafing. People are bought into the idea of a team. They want to be valued, they want to contribute, they're motivated, and they add even more to their team. So that brings us to the end of our discussion on team dynamics and cohesion. One of the key things you would have picked up here is the idea that a team is the sum of its individual parts is very, very true. And in order for that to be maximized, it requires careful thought and consideration of what are all the different elements going to go into the team and how can they be brought together into one cohesive whole. And here you see the value of all the other people around sport other than the athletes that actually go towards making the team, and the leaders and the managers of the teams that have to manage these things and guide the team forward. I hope this has been useful and provided you with some insight into the complexity of team sport and the things that must be considered. Until we meet again, take care.